Hello and welcome to this conversation about how AI is reshaping the Security Operations Center. My name is Erdem Menges, and I'm VP of Product Marketing at Command Zero. I have with me four distinguished speakers today. Let's start with a quick round of introductions. Brian, would you like to go first?
I'm Brian Cotton. I'm a partner and Senior Vice President of Frost & Sullivan's advisory business. Thanks for inviting me to the conversation today.
Of course. Lucas?
Hey everyone, I am Lucas Ferreyra. I am a Senior Industry Analyst at Frost & Sullivan. I work on research and consulting projects related to extended detection and response, managed detection and response, and managed security services. Great to be here.
I'm Al Huger. I'm a co-founder here at Command Zero and a Chief Product Officer. Thanks for having me, Erdem.
Hi, I'm Dean DeBeer. I'm also co-founder here at Command Zero, CTO, and appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Yeah, this is a very hot topic in the industry, so I just want to get straight to the interesting ideas that you'd like to share with the audience today. So maybe just starting with the evolution of the Security Operations Center and AI and cybersecurity. How do you see this transformation that we are observing today?
Good idea would be to start talking a little bit about what we see in the threat landscape, right? Because that influences the transformation. The threat landscape looks pretty similar as it did 1 or 2 years ago in terms of core challenges. We have the growing number and complexity of threats, which means the consequences of those attacks are much more dire as well. Since nowadays we rely on IoT devices, operational technology, and IT systems for pretty much every process. And this is only made worse by the current geopolitical situation with the war in Ukraine, the Middle East, India, and Pakistan, different powers taking sides and backing organizations that sometimes end up being caught in the crossfire. We also have to add AI to the mix, since it is much easier now to write malicious code, and that will lead to exploitation of new vulnerabilities. Finally, we also have the global shortage of cybersecurity personnel. When you're trying to build your own SOC, you are competing with hundreds or thousands of other companies for a very small pool of available analysts. Even firms that are not mission critical have complex environments: hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, endpoint network, mobile, email, and several other environments that they need securing. So it is really challenging to create an effective security operations center if you don't have the knowledge and the personnel to do it. And you need experienced CISOs, security managers, and analysts that really know what they're doing.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that, Lucas. The chronic talent shortage is always there. The SOC is a stressful place to work. The work is intensive, repetitive, high stress. Not only is it hard to attract talent, it's hard to retain talent. So what's going on in the SOC, as well as what's happening around it, I think that's pushing us to an inflection point. Something needs to change. Most businesses that start these days are digital first. They're digital native, AI native in a lot of cases. And to them, any kind of cybersecurity threat is existential. It means more to these businesses now that they're secure. The tools that help them are essentially the same ones on the flip side of the coin are the ones that are threatening them, AI. So I think we really are at an inflection point in the industry.
What are your thoughts on this?
I agree with everything that's been said here. Your comment about an inflection point is accurate. With the advent of AI and this pace at which things are moving, adversarial AI is a real thing, whether they be targeting, prompt injection, or using it to develop attacks, whether it be phishing or something more advanced. We're seeing this more and more often, right down to resumes arriving that have been generated by AI. That seems to be a common thing right now. I think there's an absolute necessity for the Security Operations Center to evolve into something new. Your point about digital first organizations, regardless of the vertical the problem is solving, they start with the technology. They adopt technologies that move it forward, that help solve their problem. If you look at the evolution of the Security Operations Center, traditionally it was centralized, tiered 1 through 3, with more advanced folks picking up the more complex work, tend to be queue-driven, oftentimes very manual. That's evolved somewhat to adopt tooling, which is really around API-level integrations, security orchestration. Still highly technical, very manual, a lot of work to get it up and running to see real ROI on those technologies. Certainly some folks have done it. The folks, it's been a little more difficult because they're generally underwater. We've seen that evolve into what I would term an augmented security operations center, or the augmented SOC, where the teams, whether it be through product or directly, are adopting a lot of the new technologies. So whether it be AI themselves or through products, we're starting to see that adoption. We're looking at the way other verticals are adopting technologies like agents. You can always use that and extrapolate what might that look like for the security operations center. When you dig into it, and where I think we are today, is a collaborative SOC where we now have teams leveraging AI to make decisions, to do triage, to assist it all the way through to tier 2 investigations, to automate as much of that process as possible, and quite honestly, get rid of a lot of the grunt work analysts are tasked with today so that they can focus on the more advanced, the more interesting, the more complex tasks or attacks that they see daily. I believe that we will see the Security Operations Center evolve into something distributed, where the role of the analyst evolves to be more collaborative with the tools. The role of the analyst evolves to be that of the person who designs what those agents might function like across organizations, across departments. So I think we're at an inflection point. It's an exciting time. And I feel like not next year, but maybe next week, we'll see this conversation being outdated.
Yeah, one thing we should definitely talk about is this divide between practical outcomes and hype, because there's always been a lot of hype around AI. Machine learning models have been embedded into cybersecurity solutions for a long time now. We're talking about ingesting data and correlating it and determining if there's something strange going on due to all of those signals. And it's an essential component of many cybersecurity solutions. But when we're talking about AI agents, there's this talk of how much is it going to revolutionize it. One of the things that we should always consider when talking about integrating AI into the song that you're talking about is we need to think about ways for organizations to trust more in AI, right? Because AI, it's certainly making a significant impact in the way we think about cybersecurity operations. But to truly evolve those cybersecurity operations, organizations need to trust that these AI agents with more autonomy are doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? So it is much easier to trust an expert cybersecurity analyst than it is to trust in an AI agent, right? So at this point, everyone is quite familiar with the mistakes that AI can make. There's a certain doubt at the back of our minds that the model might be hallucinating or confusing things. If we're just looking up information, it's one thing. You can check that pretty easily. But if the AI assistant wants to quarantine half of your endpoints or stop a quarter of your operational technology, that's not the same, right? So you really want to make sure that it is doing the right thing. So in that sense, I think that transparency should be the most essential quality that AI can have for deployment within a SOC. So analysts need to be able to see exactly what the AI agent is doing and see its reasoning as well. So understanding why and how to be able to really trust it. I think that this transparency behind what AI is doing will lead to trust, and it will lead to this more autonomous SOCs that you were talking about.
Yeah, I think that's very closely related to the initial topic. When Brian brought up some of the endemic issues that SOCs face today, from the perspective of a SOC, trust has always been and continues to be a substantial issue, particularly with human analysts, because the quality of your team is widely varied. What you're not looking for in any security response or investigation is a wide variety of outcomes in terms of skill. You want them to be highly consistent. They don't have that today. Shortages, this makes this problem even more acute. I think that one of the use cases that we see pretty successfully deployed inside of SOC environments, and it also speaks to, I suspect, real world outcomes that are highly useful, is the ability to take the players that you have and make them a great deal more valuable. So you can take people off the bench and into the fight to do things they weren't necessarily capable of before, allow them to punch over their weight. So you're making a great deal more efficient use of the resources you have, because you know you're probably not going to get more resources. And even if you had the money, you might not be able to find them. I think trust underpins the SOC today writ large. And I think that with models, that is also the case. But it's important to remember that there's a great degree of variety in the outcomes that in the analysts that you already have. Models are generally a little more reliable in many cases than some analysts. Not to say that you can replace them, because I don't think you can. I think you have to use the models to augment the skills that you have on the team to make the best use of who you have on the ground and turn them into superheroes.
Yeah, I think there's a need for us as a community and as a business to widen our aperture about how we see the SOC and the AI tools deployed in the SOC. Flooding the zone with ideas about replacing analysts. I think we need to think differently. And it's not that these tools are going to replace analysts, they're going to save the analyst. So given the nature of the threats that are coming up in the digital businesses today, using AI capabilities in the SOC is really the only practical, viable way to scale the capabilities and defenses against threat. And you can't do it just by throwing more bodies at it. You need to equip and save the analyst with something else, and those are the tools.
When you think about why there are challenges and adoption barriers around adopting more AI into SOC and why it's taking us some time to reach a future state where a security operations center is distributed, collaborative, and fully AI infused, what kind of challenges do you see when it comes to adopting these new technologies?
On my side, what I've seen is the first one is trust. Trust leads us to a really important point, which is accountability. So an AI-powered SOC needs to clearly determine the responsibilities of any kind of recommendations or actions taken by AI. An agentic AI is more autonomous, so that accountability line becomes more muddled, and it creates some issues. And having even one situation where AI made a significant mistake might lead to that loss of trust, right? And there's also integration with existing systems. So SOCs already have challenges when it comes to integrating disparate security sources, solutions, tools from different vendors, even from the same vendors sometimes. So we have a lot of different approaches, and then you have to consider how you're going to integrate AI within that so it can communicate with all of those data sources, for instance, with all of those solutions so that it has actionability, because what you want is that autonomous actionability. KPIs is another challenge. Even though they are essential, many organizations don't have KPIs that measure the success of their cybersecurity strategy or solutions. To increase trust and help with actionability in terms of AI, it's essential that an AI-driven SOC has different metrics that can enable the organizations to see the effect of these AI agents and measure their effectiveness. So if you don't currently have a ton of KPIs to help your cybersecurity strategy, you're going to be developing even more. And they need to be truly useful KPIs, not just seeing a number ticking up. Another issue could be customization and scalability. This is related to integration, because how adaptable an AI platform can be to the specific needs of organizations in different industry verticals, in different geographic locations, with completely distinct environments, different ecosystems, single vendor ecosystem, multi-vendor ecosystems, large companies, small companies. This also leads to the matter of governance and compliance, since organizations sometimes need to navigate data privacy regulations. An AI platform should be able to not only comply with these regulations, but also possibly help the organization in terms of data management, disclosure, and all things. The question in general, I think, would be, is an AI-enabled SOC a possible reality for every company or not for everyone?
Interesting points there, Lucas. At Frost & Sullivan, we do a lot of work on technology adoption for our clients. If I take an outside look at the SOC, a SOC is a specialized organization. In addition to the technology, they're going to have some human factors that are playing into this adoption. Two of them off the top of my head would play in there. One of them is generational. So we've got older individuals of my vintage in these SOCs, and they develop their ways of working. They develop their tool chains and trust them. I think that adoption for them is playing off of what you said, Lucas, in terms of trust. They've got to learn how to trust these things and, in a way, overcome this barrier of potentially losing control over their work and accountability. I also think that there are a lot of cultural things that happen in an organization like a SOC. A SOC by nature is going to be risk averse. The analysts are going to have a risk averse mindset. And a new tool like AI that has some unknowns around it is going to represent a potential threat. When we talk about overcoming barriers to adoption, we have to pay attention to things like generational factors and the general culture and mindset within a SOC.
if you're looking at adoption holistically, you could break it down into a couple of sections. As you mentioned, cultural resistance and skills gaps. There will be things like ethical risk and regulatory compliance issues as we start crossing borders. And then there are technical issues that generally sort of push back against adopting new technologies. And in the case of language models and agents, you're dealing with potential model drift, the performance of the agents decaying over time, the static nature in some cases where they might be too rigid in how they do things and can't expand. So this then leads to concerns about efficacy and then trust and reliability, right? Oftentimes, I think folks in security operations centers push back against over automating because it leads to what is a perceived lack of control, which oftentimes leads to reluctance in adopting technologies. If you address each one of those things separately, I think if we take into account that the Security Operations Center is like any other business unit and new technologies, new tools are going to bring levels of efficiency, people's roles change. Instead of dealing with tier 1 or even tier 2 issues, you now have analysts becoming engineering and operations specialists. You have folks that become investigation directors where they manage investigations and they help refine the technologies specific to their environment. They manage what might be the more subtle and esoteric attacks, maybe an individual being targeted by a fish versus the entire organization. Things that agents are generally designed to fit every organization might not fit your organization perfectly. While there's a natural reluctance to adopt things that might lead to a perceived threat of a person's role or position, like any industry, when technologies change, there's an opportunity to adopt and grow with those changes. Technical proficiency in AI, the more knowledge that folks build, whether through their organization or themselves, minimizes concerns around adoption. Visibility into what models do, understanding how they function, their limitations and the requirements of that human in the loops become a lot more apparent. Adopting security orchestration or log systems like a Splunk, these are all tools to enhance a person's ability to do their job better. It might mean their role changes, but over time we'll see the resistance to adoption start to fall by the wayside as they see the benefits of these tools.
It's interesting because you're in a way talking about the user experience and designing the tools from a UX point of view, and that being able to trust, interrogate the tool itself. Why did you come to this? That's the difference between the black box and the glass box. And that in and of itself would do a lot to encourage adoption if we looked at these tools from the point of view of the experience we want our analysts to have with them. And you talked about agents. Multi-agent systems are going to become important too. And so this is pushing the bleeding edge. We think about the UX between the human and the AI. And maybe we also need to be thinking about the UX between the agent and how that works. The distributed multi-agents, the picture that you're painting, absolutely, I think it's going to happen. And the UX part of that is going to be so important.
Well, first off, UX is near and dear to me. So anytime the topic comes up, I'm quite happy to ramble on. I think in some cases, it might be simple to address the agent to human communications. Oftentimes you're dealing with text, so you can get creative in ways to display it. We do see trying to draw a balance between technical visibility into how a tool is functioning and providing all the bells and whistles, and then also minimizing the complexity of a tool, which goes for agents as well, right? Especially if you have a multi-agent system with high levels of communication before you reach an outcome. I firmly believe in show your homework, allow for those communications to be presented, to be analyzed by either a senior or the tier 1 gentleman who is watching that investigation take place or interacting with the agents. When we look at the broader distributed agent-to-agent communications, I think we're seeing an incredible amount of work being done in that space specifically. If you look at registries being built for model context protocol servers, MCP servers, frameworks of protocols like agent-to-agent communication protocol, agent name system, all generally built around the same thing, using existing technologies to enable authentication, authorization, standardized communications between agents. The more we see of that, the more we can expose that. You deal with the issue of agent-to-agent communication is structured text. It generally doesn't have to be human readable, although dealing with language models, there is a level of grammar associated with that. So it can be presented. So you can bring an analyst into that conversation and present it accordingly. Where it gets interesting is where you start crossing those boundaries and allowing agents from different teams, organizations, or verticals to communicate because they now have a standard protocol. Whether you look at DNS as that protocol or something else, it certainly opens up a world of possibility, which leads into thinking about the problem beyond just security operations. I think at this point, it's very greenfield and blue sky and an opportunity for a lot of folks.
I think it's interesting to think about that idea of machine to machine communication. You can think about humanity when we went from oral history to writing. Before that, when people would tell the stories, think about the Iliad, for instance. The Iliad has a lot of structure within its text to make sure that the person reciting the poem knows what sentence comes after another so that they can remember the story. There are a lot of repetitions, a lot of names that come up again and again. So Achilles is called Achilles light-footed constantly because that's the way the structure works. And that's how they make sure the person reciting the story remembers what comes. When writing was invented, poems and writing didn't need to have that structure anymore. You didn't need any kind of resources to force the person to remember it because you had it all in writing. It changed the way that people were writing stories. In this case, this can change the way that communications between, you no longer have to think about a person understanding. You can structure the way that a machine communicates with another without caring if a person is going to be understanding that. So that kind of revolution, I think it's interesting because it can lead to much faster communications. It can lead to much faster cybersecurity in general.
I love that because when you think about all this technological advancement in pragmatic value and how these systems are going to help us be more efficient, be faster, it's very interesting. But at a philosophical level, it's almost like the evolution of storytelling, because now these machines are telling the story partially for us and with us so that we can tell a better story as a species overall. So that's very exciting stuff. There's a lot of product building that is taking place in the industry right now. There's a lot of adoption along with some potential initial challenges that we just covered. But I just want to focus on the pragmatic value of AI in the SOC today. What are the winning use cases so far? Where are customers getting value from this technology today?
From my experience working with customers, there's a number of areas that they can see immediate benefit from. And I think that's really important that they're able to measure the investment they're making in this and show that it's proving value. One of them is allowing analysts to solve complex problems much faster. And not just more quickly, because of course that's always important, but if you come to the same conclusion incorrectly faster, it's to no one's benefit. They're able to both take complex problems, unravel them very quickly, correctly. And usually those two things don't intersect, time and accuracy in the SOC. And I think you can measurably show that to be not the case when you engage LLM to help an analyst come to a better set of conclusions. And that's true across all the tiers, but specifically at tier 2 and 3. Your earlier cases are often very easily solvable and don't necessarily need a large language model. There's lots of prior work in that space. Things that get escalated are quite complex, and large language models can help people unravel, make cognitive leaps more effectively, do report writing, timelining, correlation, and use their judgments to come to a better conclusion. So I've seen a lot of success with that inside of SOCs so far. I mean, there are certainly other use cases, but that really stands out to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that AI can accelerate the professional development flow to analysts and can also help with confidence in performing actions, right? Since the recommendations are informed with data and generally let them do more interesting stuff and collaborate more on the overarching cybersecurity strategy of the company instead of doing repetitive tasks, which is more exciting. And at the end of the day, this is going back to something that Al mentioned way before, the last mile of cybersecurity. I still think that should involve humans. A massive part of cybersecurity is managing human risk, for instance. And I feel like there will always be an aspect of connecting with other humans within cybersecurity. Even if we reach the point of AGI and completely dehumanizing certain aspects of security, I don't think that we should really go there. So there will always be a place for humans in that.
I don't think anybody should approach the problem with the assessment that I'm going to replace people. But I think there's some realpolitik in play here, which is that whenever our industry experiences new changes in technology, the balance of advantage generally goes to the attacker, at least initially. They're unencumbered by budget. They're unencumbered by change within an org. They can simply take things to school and make them work. Given that's the case, we have to understand that inside of the SOC, they already live in an asymmetric environment that's deeply uncomfortable and unfair. It's going to get a great deal more so with AI. Without leveraging AI in their environment, their ability to keep up and do a credible job defending is going to be seriously impaired.
What should organizations expect from security operations centers later in 2025 and early in 2026? What's next for security operations centers?
I think what I'll mention about needing AI to keep up, that's absolutely true. Organizations have always been kind of pragmatic about the tools they're using and about the features within those tools they choose to use or not use. When speaking with customers, I've found myself in situations where I was asking a company about the agentic AI features of a certain solution, and the CISO is telling me, no, we're not using that much. This should continue to be true for most of the integration with AI. You can't just throw AI at a problem and expect it to go away. It's just another tool. Tools have specific situations in which they are useful and others in which they are not. Going back to the question, is an AI-enabled SOC a possible reality for every company, or useful even? I think AI in the SOC will be essential for every company, but organizations with truly effective SOCs and high security resilience will be the ones that find how to integrate it seamlessly with their processes and know what to take and what to leave on the table. You don't necessarily have to take everything.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we'll see measured, intelligent adoption inside the SOC. I don't think it's a question of whether we will see adoption. We're already seeing there's an extraordinary amount of innovation taking place in the startup community around this space. And that just generally will lead to adoption, certainly first by early adopters and people who are willing to extend their trust a little more than highly established, rigid environments that are regulated environments. But I think that the journey towards autonomous SOC has started. And what autonomous SOC means is up for a lot of debate. But in terms of having real benefit driven into your org inside the SOC from AI, we're going to see a lot more of it towards the end of 25 for sure. And we're seeing quite a large ramp. We're a very small fish in a big pond. So if we're seeing it, it's, I'm sure, happening writ large. And then in 26, I think it'll be a dominant conversation.
Yeah, from my point of view, what's next for the SOC? It's going to happen fast. Dean, you're absolutely right. AI time is faster than internet time. Market forces are going to crystallize and push the imperative. The costs and the tightening around cyber insurance, regulatory issues, scrutiny, ROI pressures, all of this is going to push us toward a solution where we have the tools, the AI-enabled distributed SOC. I think we're going to see things move fast in digital native, AI-first startups. There could be some other large organizations who have these capabilities in-house, moonshots within their organizations. But I think we're going to see these be the leaders. And then we're going to see a number of fast followers that are going to happen. And then I think we're unfortunately going to see a lot of laggards, and those are the ones we really have to watch out for. If I had to put a fine point on it, I'd say that the distributed AI-powered SOC is not some 5-year strategic roadmap. It's a 6 to 8 to 9 month imperative for digital resilience. And that's all there is to it.
I would agree with that. Initially, when I was thinking about what could be done with the technologies today and how quickly they're advancing, I was writing down and throwing out timelines of 2030, 2035. But when you look at the speed at which technology is moving, with the speed at which people can innovate today, people can come up with a design document in 30 minutes. I think you're right. 9 months is a very fair time frame to put a pin in the map and say, okay, how close have we gotten so far? I do think it's a journey focusing purely on security. You can look at the use cases, starting with, and I think this goes for any adoption of a technology. Any security organization needs to look at use cases well suited to being solved by an agent-based solution or by an AI-driven solution, whether it be structured pipelines or something more autonomous like a fleet of agents. If you focus on solving specific issues or problems or use cases that you have, and then expanding those, I think you'll see adoption pick up versus there needs to be a blanket adoption in my organization for this and all things need to change. Looking at the use cases, HR communicating with the security group when they have employees last day or someone resigned, or they have any number of use cases where they need visibility into that user's activity. Today, that's a process whereby an issue or a ticket is opened. and whatever their ticketing system is, that gets picked up by somebody in security. They have to go to one or many systems. Ideally, if the data exists, they can then draw a picture for HR of what that user did over the past 2 weeks, for example. I see that evolving very quickly into a purely agent-based process where HR's agent is given the task of what did these users do? If you look at some of the technologies out there, like agent communication protocol, agent to agent, agent discovery, it can discover agents within its network that have the capabilities it needs to answer the question of what did these guys do? The security agent picks up the task, then can deploy that to multiple agents to work in parallel to look at, say, there's 3 users. They can determine whether activity is normal or anomalous based on the organization. The user with anomalous activity gets escalated to an analyst for further review and validation. It then gets funneled into a reporting pipeline that goes back to the agent that presents it to the individual in HR that requested that information. A 1-week timeline versus 10, 15 minutes or round trip to get the information. I find it hard to believe that these types of use cases won't be solved in the near future. At least from where I sit, thinking about what's possible, looking at how this might evolve beyond across all disciplines. Microsoft recently came out with an open source project called Natural Language Web, or NL Web, where it's a way to instrument your existing infrastructure, your presence on the internet or otherwise, with language models. It goes to the conversation earlier around how do we structure data for agents or language models to pick up and use. When you start thinking about use cases, it becomes a truly exciting time to be in technology. I was thinking about a medical use case the other day. You have folks that are distributed around the world, rural areas, big cities, some folks with access to data, others with not. Assume a patient walks into a doctor's office and is diagnosed with something that has, the markers are unusual and it seems to be rare. They can pass it off to their medical agent that can go to the Sloan Ketterings of the world, the NIH, research institutions, research over at big pharmaceuticals. It can gather all this information together. It can look at the symptoms of that user. It can then paint a picture of what it believes might happen and present options or research that might not have been immediately available to that doctor or that medical professional because they're in a rural area and they don't have a direct access. So when you think about this and what's possible, where all data sources, whether it be a news website and they are distributed agent, it's not one agent going out and finding information and collating it. It's one agent communicating with other agents that have their own expertise that can reach out to other agents. So you get this distributed mesh that brings back what would be something that I don't think anyone could research effectively to get to that point. Applying this to security, it's an exciting time to try to solve this problem and think about what is possible coming down the line.
Thank you everyone for joining me for this call. We'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Erdem.
Right. Cheers,
Thank you.
all.
Thanks.